Okay, so to get started with learning trigonometry, the first thing we need to do is look at the naming convention about the sides of the triangle. Now, once you have a right-angled triangle, the hypotenuse is always the hypotenuse. It's the longest side, and you'll notice that it's opposite the right angle. That never changes, but when it comes to naming the other two sides, we name them relative to a certain angle. So if I label this angle here theta, if you haven't seen that symbol before, it's sort of like an O that you come around and then just do a little flick like that. And you see this symbol used a lot in trigonometry to label angles. If I label this angle theta and say this is the angle that I care about and that I'm working with in this triangle, then one side is directly opposite that angle, whereas the other side is next to it. And the fancy word for next to is adjacent. So we use these words opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse every time we're looking at a right-angled triangle and trying to use our trig. Now, of course, if I was looking at this angle up here and I'd named it something else, let's say we called it x, then of course I'd have to rename these sides. This would now be the opposite side to x, and this would be the adjacent side. So it's all relative to the angle, and you need to look at what angle you have, what sides you're working with to decide which one's opposite and which one's adjacent. Now, once you've done that, the three basic trig ratios, and they're ratios because they're the proportions of a side. Remember in our introduction we said that if we know the proportions of two sides in a right-angled triangle, then we know what angles must go with that because they stay the same. Every triangle that has its sides in that certain ratio will have the exact same angle. And all of those have been worked out before and plugged in to formula that our calculator can help us find really quickly and easily. Now, the trig ratios are called sine, cosine, and tangent. But as a shortcut, we write sine like this without the e on it. Now, it looks like sin, but when we say that, we still say sine. And cos, short for cosine, and tan, short for tangent. Now, to find the sine of something, you can't just say sine is this. You have to say the sine of an angle. So to do this, it's almost like you're performing something, like when you take the square root of a number. You're taking the square root of that number. Well, we're taking the sine of this angle. Now, the sine of this angle is a ratio, and that comes in again with our whole idea of ratios. It's the length of the opposite side divided by the length of the hypotenuse, and you put it in like a fraction. Now, what does that mean? It means that if this was, say, hang on, let's do another example down here. Let's have a right-angled triangle, and we know that there's an angle here, and we might know that this is 3 meters and this is 4 meters. We could write a perfectly good equation here to say I'm dealing with, let's make this be 5 meters. If I want to make the sine of theta, then I need to find the opposite side and divide it by the hypotenuse. So that will be the opposite side, 3, divided by the hypotenuse, 5. So I could say that sine theta, in this case, is 3/5. That's the ratio of the sides and according to that angle. Now, when you find the cos or the cosine of an angle, you take the adjacent side and divide that by the hypotenuse. So in this example, we'd say the cos of theta, the adjacent side to theta, the next two sides, that's 4, over the hypotenuse, that's 5. And of course, we can also make the third ratio, dividing opposite by adjacent. So the tan of theta equals the opposite side, in this case it's 3, divided by the adjacent side, in this case 4. And in this way we can come up with trig ratios and trig equations like this. Now, either we don't know the angle and we do know the sides, in which case we can use our calculator to figure out the angle, or we know the angle and one of the sides and we can use our calculator to figure out the other one. Now, a quick and easy way to remember these opposites and hypotenuses and adjacents would be to remember this. Kids everywhere for a long time have been learning trig by learning this strange word. Say it over and over a bunch of times and then you'll always know it. Sohcahtoa. Now, if you break it up, it's got 9 letters. The soh part, Sohcahtoa. Let's try and say it like that with the H sounding a bit funny. Sohcahtoa. SOH stands for sine is opposite over hypotenuse. The ka part is cos is adjacent over hypotenuse, and then the toa reminds you that tan is opposite over adjacent.